Hi guys, my name is Colin and this is Colin Talks Crypto. Bitcoin is getting ready for a massive move up. I think we're going to look back at this moment where we are right now and realize we were at the bottom of the climb of a giant mountainous move. This is going to be enormous, and it's good to be one step ahead. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing all the way up. And here's why I say that. We have a series of TA indicators that are cascading into each other, forming what looks to be the playbook for a run to 140,000 on up. This started back in September, where we had sort of a bottoming pattern, inverse head and shoulders drawn in blue here. And this is a bottoming pattern when it breaks above the neckline, which it did around September 10th. And I've drawn the arrow showing the path that you would expect it to take and which it did ultimately take. Now, just more recently, I noticed that we had sort of a topping indicator, or at least a local topping indicator, a smaller head and shoulders, not inverse, this time a regular head and shoulders, with a pretty sloped neckline, but still a head and shoulders nonetheless. And that I thought, and I posted about it right here, I thought this looks like Bitcoin's probably going to make a move down from this point. Lo and behold, about 1 day later, yep, sure enough, here is the breakdown. We just saw a massive breakdown, very steep, very sudden, from $115,500 to just below $112,000, all in the matter of about a day or less. Actually, in one single 8-hour candle is where that took place. And so that is interesting because now we had a bottoming pattern of a head and shoulders, a topping pattern of head and shoulders. And so where does that leave us? And I thought that it would be likely that we'd actually bounce off of the neckline of this blue head and shoulders. If you were to draw this over like this, I thought that actually might be where the bounce would occur. It actually went a little below that, and now it's actually hitting up against that as resistance. But I took a step back, and I want to give a shout out to Matthew Hyland, who brought this next head and shoulders to my attention, the green head and shoulders. Follow him on X if you haven't. He's a great guy. And what we're looking at here is actually a series of head and shoulders inside of each other, sort of nestled like one of those Russian dolls, those wooden dolls that are carved and stacked inside of each other. And so we have actually, check this out, we have the blue head and shoulders, this inverse head and shoulders, would become the head of a larger green inverse head and shoulders. The entirety of this blue head and shoulders becomes the head of this green inverse head and shoulders. And then we would have the right side of this potential green inverse head and shoulders being formed at the neckline by this orange head and shoulders as a topping pattern, really just forming the sort of beginning of the right shoulder. And if you look back over here, back in mid-August, we had a left shoulder already formed on this particular HNS. And so it looks to me like we have a very good setup for making a higher low on this otherwise broadening wedge pattern and fulfilling this green HNS. And so I think that what's going to happen is we've just seen this big breakdown on this orange head and shoulders, and that is effectively forming the beginning stages of a right shoulder. It doesn't mean that the shoulder has completed forming yet. It's not going to rocket up tomorrow. You know, these do take a little time to consolidate and sort of bounce around a little bit before they make their next directional move. But I think that there's enough indicators pointing to this being the most likely outcome. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I am saying that I think it's the most likely outcome at this stage of the game. And I'm taking into account a lot of factors, including sentiment, where we are in like a 4-year or extending Bitcoin cycle, etc., as well as many other metrics that I've been looking at. And I think that this makes the most sense from a macro perspective. Right now, you have a lot of people second guessing if this was the top, like of the whole bull run. A lot of people think that this could be the top and that we are perhaps beginning the bear market already. And a lot of people have sold and have been questioning where we are. And if you're not in that camp, I would say it's probably safe to bet that you're at least wondering, like maybe, you know, you're kind of worrying a little bit like, oh boy, we just saw this big breakdown. Could we be in the bear market, or could the top already be in? I think that is crossing the minds of a lot of people. And Here, I'm going to pull up my notes here so I don't miss any points. I make these posts typically on X first. If you're not following me on X, it's at Colin, 1L, Colin T Crypto for Colin Talks Crypto. And that's my handle on X. I encourage you to follow me there because I post daily. I make videos whenever I feel inspired enough to make a video. That could be every 2 weeks, every month, every 3 days. It's very like random. But I make posts on X basically daily, okay? So if you want my most up-to-date content and you're wondering why you don't know something I've said previously, it's because you're not following me on X. All right, so I've covered the TA patterns. Now, the target really would be about $140,000 plus for the broadening wedge pattern. And so let's back it up again. You have the blue head and shoulders making up the head of this green head and shoulders. You have this orange head and shoulders making up the right shoulder, potentially. I've drawn a dotted line where I think the projected path of Bitcoin's going to head over the coming month or two. And then we have all of that nestled inside of this massive broadening wedge, or also known as a megaphone pattern. Now, a target for a megaphone pattern is taken from basically the trend line here to the upper trend line, and then you stack it on top of the breakout point. So if we had, for example, here's 108,000 or 107,000 for the bottom, taking a measured move up to about 125,000, 124,000, that's about a $15,000 move. So you would stack that on top of the breakout point, and you'd say, well, we break out at 125,000 plus another 15,000 takes us to $140,000. That's how I came to that figure. That doesn't mean it has to stop there, and it doesn't mean it can't go higher, but I think that that is a very reasonable target if and when it does break out of this upper boundary of the white broadening wedge, or also known as a megaphone pattern. Okay. Now, let's look at some other factors, because it's not just the TA alone that I'm looking at. I'm looking at sentiment. Like I said, a lot of people are questioning if the top is in right now. You wouldn't see that if this was the actual top. What you would see if it was the actual, if this was the actual top, you would see people being euphoric because most people get it wrong. And you'd see people saying, we're going higher. Like, and I know that in our tiny little tight knit X bubbles on X or YouTube, you know, we're very hyper connected. So maybe you probably have a bit more close knowledge to this than your average investor. Keep in mind, like, Bitcoin's a global asset. It's known to the world. You know, not everyone's in your little X Twitter bubble, you know, or your Telegram group or your Discord group. Like, you are more hyper connected than the average person or the average investor. So you have a one up in terms of your connectedness. So just because you think, oh, the Bitcoin cycle's not over, doesn't mean that your knowledge is representative of the average investor. You're a little more hyper connected, and that's a good thing. But just be aware that the average Joe Schmo, first of all, isn't really very euphoric. Like, sentiment is quite low right now. And no one out there in the regular world is screaming, oh, we're going higher, we're going higher. Like there's no stopping Bitcoin. And your grandma's calling, your friends are calling. Like, that's not really happening in full force just yet. And that would be happening if we were actually at the top, because you have the dumb money pushing the price to irrational levels. That is exactly how the blow-off tops occur. You have the dumb money pushing the price to irrational levels. And in that moment, you have people thinking that it could never go down ever again. That's not the case right now. You have a couple people, and again, you're hyper-connected, so you probably have more of that than the average investor. But that's not the broad sentiment. Right now, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of questioning if this was the top. So I would say this is the perfect recipe from a sentiment point of view that Bitcoin could be moving higher, okay? Now, the timing of this is another reason why I think that this makes a lot of sense. This move makes a lot of sense within the broader context of a 4-year cycle that is gradually lengthening. And I do think that the 4-year cycle, as I've covered in my last video, watch that if you haven't, I do think that the 4-year cycle is gradually lengthening. It's going to become a 4.5-year cycle, maybe this time. I think that we're going to get a couple months extension, roughly, from the last cycle in terms of time. So for that to happen, this makes sense. You can't have a top already. That wouldn't make sense at all. You'd actually have a shortening cycle. So if we're going to have a lengthening cycle, I'm not saying like super cycle or half the way into 2026. I think that Q3 and Q4 of 2026 are very unlikely for a top. I do think that Q1 is very possible. And to get into that Q1 of 2026 or the very end of 2025, you'd have to have a move up, something like this. So in terms of timing, this move makes perfect sense. We can't go sideways forever and make new all-time highs in the right period of time if we don't make a big move up. And we've been consolidating for a long, long time now. You know, this megaphone pattern is what, 2.5 months on top of consolidating just prior to that and another pattern. So it makes sense from a timing perspective. And no metric or indicator that I'm watching has indicated that this was the top. Nothing I've seen has indicated that this is the top to me. This is my opinion. I created CBBI.info, a basket of 9 indicators that have historically been accurate for calling Bitcoin tops and Bitcoin bottoms, aggregated into one score, and that's CBBI.info. And none of those metrics really are saying overheated. Maybe there's like 1 out of 9, but honestly, I would say that's an outlier. Like, they're not screaming overheated, and they're definitely not screaming overheated right now. I think the score is in the 70s. It's like in the mid 70s out of a potential 100. And so things like the Pi cycle top indicator, like that one metric alone has a flawless track record for calling Bitcoin tops thus far, and it has not even come close to indicating a Bitcoin top. Sentiment is very low, right? The Coinbase app rank is not number 1 in the App Store, which it has been every other time that we've hit a bull run top. The search term for Bitcoin and for altcoins is not at the all-time highs. Tether dominance. You've probably seen some of my other videos. If you haven't, I urge you to watch that. I'll just let you know, Tether dominance is not screaming overheated. It's not touched that upper parabola where I think the next top will touch. I think that the Tether dominance logarithmic upper regression line will tag the upper part of it when we are approaching the next peak. And it's not close yet. It's not close. So none of these metrics are screaming overheated. So I think that anyone who's calling this a top is making a mistake. I think they're incorrect. That's my take. Not financial advice, and nothing in this video is. I could be mistaken, right? Like, I'm just doing the best I can with the knowledge I have and the metrics I'm looking at. But I don't think, in my professional or not so professional opinion, I'm just some guy on YouTube, right? I think that the top is not in. And I think that this move up makes a lot of sense to make the rest of the cycle play out as it is expected, as you would expect for a gradually lengthening cycle. Okay? Now, there's some other consequences of this move if Bitcoin does this. And I've been kind of making this prediction, and it's playing out so far. Bitcoin dominance is going to surge yet again. Not forever, but for a little while. Bitcoin dominance, maybe for this move right here, is going to surge as Bitcoin outperforms altcoins, as Bitcoin outperforms Ethereum also. And I think that the ETH BTC ratio is going to drop further before taking off to new highs as well. I could see the ETH BTC ratio easily going down to 0.033, likely going down to 0.03, and maybe going down to 0.026. Those are kind of like my 3 target zones. And I'm going to be swing trading my Bitcoin back into ETH at one of those lower ranges and flip trade again. I've already done it like 3 times. I'm going to do it yet again. And this time I'm going to hold that ETH for the remainder of the bull run when I finally enter back in about a month and a half from now, roughly, and make some more Bitcoin profit. Basically, the goal is to make more Bitcoin profit at the end of it, or to cash out some of my holdings in 3 to 4 months or whenever the cycle actually ends. And so another consequence to this move happening, if it plays out the way I think it is that altcoins are going to take a back seat yet again to Bitcoin for a short period of time. I don't think it will be longer than 2 more months. I think that somewhere in that time frame, Bitcoin dominance is going to put in its top, and then you're going to see the actual vertical plummet perhaps take place, and which is AKA alt season, like the remainder of alt season. But I think what's happening right now is a lot of people are maybe getting fooled. Like, a lot of people thought that alt season was now and there was no more bouncing that was going to be had by Bitcoin dominance. But I think that this move is going to make Bitcoin dominance go up for a little while until then alts follow. but there's a delayed reaction, both at cycle tops when alts peak after Bitcoin and when Bitcoin makes a intra-cycle move up. There's a delay where the liquidity first goes into Bitcoin, which is why dominance would climb first, and then it trickles down into the altcoins, and that's why the altcoins have a delayed climb afterwards. So I think that is the logic behind Bitcoin dominance climbing and then putting in like a sub-peak, a lower high, and then plummeting, and then you have your actual alt season. And a lot of people, I think, piled into alts recently because it did look fairly compelling that Bitcoin dominance was just going to go down from here. And the market is great at making people wrong. And so I think that it's probably going to do that. I think it's probably going to, Bitcoin dominance is going to climb. So the relative altcoin value as priced in Bitcoin is going to drop for the next month or two before it actually turns around, and then we're going to see the true alt season or the final biggest leg of alt season. And I do think that that alt season final biggest leg is around the corner because it has to start relatively soon. If we're going to finish in December or January for Bitcoin, like you have to kind of get ramping up here. But we don't have to start just yet. We have a couple months before it really goes vertical. And that final leg, as I covered in one of my last videos, actually my very last video, showed how the final most vertical alt season period was very small relatively. It's just a couple months. And so I kind of anticipate it to be about 3 months. So if it starts in 1 or 2 months from now, that would make sense for a final top. So let's say we have, I'm just guessing here, but we have like a Bitcoin final top around December or January or February, and then tack on 1 more month on top of that for the peak, not for the whole move, but for the peak of your favorite altcoin topping out. And the smaller the market cap, probably the later that is as liquidity flows down. Okay, guys, so this is what I see happening. I think we're going to look back at this moment where we are right now and realize we were at the bottom of the climb of a giant mountainous move. This is going to be enormous, and it's good to be one step ahead. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing all the way up. Again, this is my forecasted path. Let's see how it plays out. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think this is the most likely scenario. I hope you're having a great day, and I look forward to riding the last glorious, euphoric moment of this bull run to the all-time highs and taking some profits if that's what you want to do. And I'll be here with you, giving you my opinion the whole way. Have a great day.